In the middle of a blinding snowstorm deep in the Montana wilderness, former Delta Force operative Ethan Ward had long stopped believing in miracles. Haunted by the ghosts of war, he came here to disappear, a broken man in a broken cabin. But one night, as the wind howled like the voices of the fallen, a faint scratching came at his door. When he opened it, the storm delivered something he could never expect. A wounded Belgian Malinois, half dead, eyes still burning with purpose. What began as an act of mercy soon became a descent into mystery. A missing man, a buried secret, and a trail that led Ethan toward redemption, or ruin. Because in the heart of the blizzard, the dog wasn't just lost. He was leading him to something, or someone, that heaven hadn't forgotten. If you believe in second chances and the unseen hand of grace, hit like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who still believes that miracles can wear fur and walk through snow. The snow fell in silence, heavy and endless, muffling every sound that once belonged to the living world. In the heart of Montana's pine wilderness, a lone cabin stood half buried under white drifts, its chimney breathing a thin ribbon of smoke into a sky bruised by storm. Inside, Ethan Ward sat before the crackling fireplace, his weathered hands wrapped around a dented metal mug of coffee gone cold. The firelight carved deep shadows across his face, angular, scarred, the kind of face forged by war and regret. He was 40, his dark brown hair streaked with gray at the temples, his beard trimmed close but not neat. His eyes, steel gray, alert even in solitude, had the stillness of a man who had seen too much. 3 months had passed since Ethan left the Army. 15 years of service in Delta Force had turned him into a weapon that never truly powered down. His last mission in Syria had ended in chaos. A roadside bomb, 3 teammates dead, his left shoulder torn open, his mind splintered. The guilt clung to him like frost. Nights brought explosions behind his eyelids. Days brought silence so complete it rang in his ears. He'd chosen this cabin because no one would find him here, not friends, not pity, not the ghosts of command. It had belonged to his grandmother, Carolyn Winter, a gentlewoman who had died the previous spring. She had loved these woods. Ethan, in contrast, could hardly stand to look at them. He kept the cabin simple, military neat. 1 cot, 1 table, a shelf lined with canned food, a rifle above the door. The isolation suited him. Each morning he chopped wood, melted snow for water, and listened to the radio static that never resolved into a human voice. It was routine, predictable, until that night in late January when the storm came howling out of the north. The wind roared through the trees, slamming against the cabin's walls. Temperature dropped to -20, the kind of cold that strips skin in seconds. Ethan sat awake near the fire, listening to the moan of the storm, the wooden beams creaking. It reminded him of distant outposts overseas, of the waiting before contact. He told himself he'd left that behind. Then, through the storm's fury, came a sound so faint he thought it imagined at first, scratching. He froze. Another sound followed, whimpering. It wasn't human. Ethan reached for the M4 carbine resting beside the door, every muscle coiled. Moving silently, he approached the entrance. The scratching grew weaker. Someone, or something, was dying out there. He hesitated only a second. Then the soldier in him overruled the recluse. He unlatched the bolt, opened the door against a blast of freezing wind. At first he saw nothing but white. Then, half buried in the snow, he spotted it, a dog, sprawled on its side, one leg twisted unnaturally. Its coat, once tawny and sleek, was now matted with blood and ice. Ethan crouched, assessing automatically. Belgian Malinois, male, maybe 5 years old. 40 kilograms, body temperature dropping fast. The dog's chest rose shallowly, breath visible in faint clouds. A thin leather collar clung to its neck, the tag bent and scratched. "Easy, boy," Ethan muttered, his voice hoarse from disuse. The animal's eyes opened, pale amber, unnervingly intelligent. They met his for a long second, not pleading, but commanding. Ethan felt an unexpected jolt in his chest. He had seen that look before, on wounded men who refused to die. He slung the rifle over his back and lifted the dog carefully. Despite the size, the animal felt weightless, all sinew and exhaustion. Back inside, Ethan laid him near the fire, on an old blanket, checking the pulse, the wounds, the breathing. Years of battlefield triage came flooding back. There were deep gashes along the ribs, likely knife cuts. Circular burns on the flank. Electrical, maybe from a prod. Not the work of predators. Humans had done this. The dog whimpered once when Ethan cleaned the wounds with antiseptic, but did not struggle. He seemed to understand. "You've been through hell," Ethan murmured. His own hands shook slightly as he bandaged the leg with strips torn from an old undershirt. He wrapped the dog in a second blanket, adding a few logs to the fire. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, warmth began to creep back. When the work was done, Ethan sat beside the dog, exhaustion pressing down. "Rex," he said aloud, reading the worn tag. "That's your name?" The dog's ear twitched faintly. "Guess we're both ghosts now." He poured water into a tin bowl, softened some jerky, and placed it within reach. The Malinois sniffed weakly, then licked at the water. Pure. Careful, deliberate. Ethan leaned back against the wall, staring into the fire. For the first time in months, his cabin wasn't silent. The faint sound of breathing beside him, steady, alive, filled the space in a way that made his throat tighten. He should have felt relief, but instead unease grew inside him. The wounds were fresh, less than a day old. Whoever had done this might still be out there. His instincts, dulled by solitude, began to hum awake. He checked his rifle, confirmed the safety off, and secured the windows. Old habits, he thought grimly, never die. They just wait. Hours passed. The wind outside eased to a distant wail. The fire burned low, shadows flickering across the rough-hewn walls. Ethan dozed lightly in the chair, the kind of half-sleep soldiers learn on deployment. A sudden whimper jolted him awake. The dog was restless, paws twitching, eyes darting behind half-closed lids. A dream, or a memory. Then it stilled, head lifting toward the door, ears erect. Ethan followed its gaze. There was nothing but the hiss of the dying fire, yet every muscle in his body tightened. The dog's tail was rigid, body tense, nostrils flaring as if catching a scent beyond human range. Ethan rose silently, stepping closer to the window. The snow had stopped. Moonlight filtering through clouds. All seemed still. Then, faintly, he saw movement. Just the sway of trees, or perhaps something more. "Easy," he whispered. The dog's gaze never wavered from the door. After a long minute, it relaxed slightly, exhaling through its nose before settling back down. Ethan stayed awake until dawn, rifle in lap, the old habits of vigilance rekindled. When morning came, the forest outside was quiet again, deceptively pure. Sunlight scattered across unbroken snowfields. The dog slept soundly now, chest rising steady, paws twitching as if chasing ghosts. Ethan stood watching him for a long moment, then turned toward the frost-covered window. He whispered to himself, "You didn't come here by accident, did you?" Outside, the frozen world offered no answer. But something deep in his gut, something honed by years of survival, told him this was just the beginning. Morning crept over the pines, pale and cold, turning the snow into a field of glass. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to embers. Ethan Ward crouched beside the Malinois, the same disciplined focus in his gray eyes that once guided him through gunfire. The dog breathed slowly now, ribs rising and falling beneath the blankets. Ethan unwrapped one of the bandages to check the wound. Clean, no sign of infection, though the edges of the cut were too precise to be from an animal attack. He reached for his flashlight, tracing the fur around the wound. Beneath the left shoulder, he saw the faint circular burn of something electrical. Cattle prod, he thought grimly. Someone had done this on purpose. Ethan leaned back against the wall, rubbing a scar that ran from his jaw to his ear. Pain flickered through him, half memory, half present. He had seen cruelty like this before, in villages torn apart by warlords, in the eyes of people who hurt because they could. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" he murmured. The dog's ears twitched at his voice, but didn't rise. Later, when the fire crackled again and the coffee boiled, the Malinois stirred. He lifted his head, alert yet wary. Up close, Ethan could see more details now. The sharp black mask over the muzzle, the intelligent eyes of burnt amber, the muscular frame beneath the scars. Around his neck hung a bent identification tag. Ethan rinsed it in warm water, brushing away soot until he could read one engraved word: Rex. "Rex," he repeated softly. "Guess we're on a first-name basis now." Rex blinked once, as if acknowledging the introduction. His gaze followed Ethan's every movement, methodical, assessing, like a soldier sizing up a stranger. When Ethan stood to pour food into a tin bowl, Rex's tail twitched once, cautious. He didn't eat until Ethan stepped away and sat back down. For 2 days, the blizzard kept them prisoners. The wind screamed through the chimney. Frost gathered along the window edges. Ethan split firewood inside, melted snow for water, and checked Rex's bandages twice daily. The more he tended to the animal, the more the quiet between them changed. It wasn't the empty silence of isolation anymore. It was measured, companionable. On the 3rd morning, the storm broke. The air outside had gone still, almost too still. Ethan opened the door to a world blanketed in white, sunlight glinting off every branch. Rex limped toward the threshold, testing his weight. "Not yet," Ethan said, but the dog ignored him, stepping outside and sniffing the wind. The cold didn't seem to bother him. His ears tilted forward, nose twitching, muscles taut with something Ethan recognized immediately: attention. "What is it?" he asked, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved but the slow sway of pine branches. Then Rex let out a low, steady growl. It wasn't fear. It was warning. Ethan's instincts sharpened. He scanned the tree line again. No movement, no sound. But the Malinois' reaction was too deliberate to dismiss. He knelt beside him. "You smell something out there?" Rex's gaze never left the woods. Ethan fetched his binoculars from the gear trunk near the door. Through the lenses, he studied the slope descending toward the frozen creek. Just snowdrifts and shape patterns, until he caught something half-buried. A dark shape, maybe metal. He adjusted the focus. No, not metal. Wood and canvas. A broken sled, the kind used for hauling cargo. Fresh drag marks led into the deeper forest. "Great," Ethan muttered. "Someone's been out here recently." He stepped back inside, rechecked his radio. The static buzzed but offered no connection. The nearest ranger station was over 15 miles away. His signal wouldn't reach through the mountains. He considered hiking out but dismissed the thought. He wasn't leaving a half-healed animal alone. Rex paced near the window, restless. Ethan noticed a pattern. Each time he passed the same spot by the door, he stopped and stared at the woods again, like he was waiting for something. Or someone. By late afternoon, the quiet began to press in again. Ethan took his notebook, one of the few relics from his Army days, and started jotting notes. Subject, Rex. Condition: stable. Behavior: hypervigilant. Purpose: unknown. He caught himself writing as if debriefing a mission. Old habits. He sighed, closing the book. As dusk fell, the forest took on a strange amber glow. Ethan stepped outside to check the generator behind the cabin. The air was still sharp, biting. The Malinois followed, his limp barely noticeable now. Ethan crouched by the generator, adjusting the fuel line. "You sure you're fit for patrol, soldier?" he asked dryly. Rex gave no answer, just watched the tree line again. That's when Ethan noticed it, a faint print in the snow beyond the shed. Not an animal track. Too deep, too defined. Boot tread. Size 10, maybe 11. And fresh. He rose slowly, eyes narrowing. Someone had been near his cabin within the last few hours. His pulse quickened. He scanned the horizon, hand instinctively moving toward his rifle, slung on the porch. The print led away, disappearing toward the woods, the same direction Rex had been fixated on. Back inside, Ethan locked the door and dimmed the lamps. Rex settled near the hearth, but didn't relax. The dog's gaze stayed fixed on the window, his body a coiled spring. Later that night, Ethan dreamed again. He was back in Syria, the explosion, the ringing in his ears, his men shouting over the radio. Then silence, always silence. He woke with a start, sweat chilling his back. For a moment he didn't know where he was. Then he saw the cabin, the faint firelight, the dog watching him from the corner. "You too?" Ethan whispered. "Haunted?" Rex tilted his head as if understanding the word. Days turned into a quiet rhythm. Morning checks, feeding, walking short distances, the wound healed faster than expected. But Rex's alertness never faded. He'd often stop mid-step, ears pricked, staring into the woods. On the fifth evening, while Ethan chopped firewood, Rex began barking fiercely toward the forest's edge. Not random barking, measured, calling. "Hey!" Ethan shouted, dropping the axe. The dog ignored him, bounding through the snow despite the limp. Ethan followed, rifle in hand. The tracks led them 50 yards before stopping abruptly near a cluster of birch trees. There was nothing there, except a faint metallic glint, half buried in the snow. Ethan brushed it off. It was a fragment of chain, steel, fresh, not rusted. He pocketed it and scanned the horizon. No footprints now, no movement. But his gut told him this wasn't coincidence. The dog wasn't reacting to ghosts. Someone had been out here, and recently. They returned to the cabin as darkness swallowed the valley. Ethan rebolted the door, double-checked the rifle, and fed the fire. Rex lay near his feet, tense but silent. The two of them sat like sentinels, one man, one dog, listening to the forest breathe. Outside, the snow began to fall again, slow and quiet. But Ethan's thoughts refused to settle. He looked at Rex and muttered, "Whoever did that to you, they might come looking." The dog's amber eyes glowed faintly in the firelight. He didn't blink. He didn't need to. Ethan already knew. Whatever had hurt this animal wasn't finished yet, and somehow he was now part of it. The snow had hardened overnight, a crust of ice glittering beneath the morning light. The air was brittle, thin enough to sting Ethan Ward's lungs with each breath. He stood at the door of his cabin, watching Rex, the Malinois, scratch anxiously at the wood, tail stiff and low. The dog's amber eyes were locked on the dark wall of trees beyond the clearing. Something was pulling him out there, something that refused to let him rest. Ethan's instincts, honed over 15 years of combat, hummed with the same tension. He slung his M4 carbine over his shoulder, clipped the satellite radio to his vest, and tightened the strap of his headlamp. "All right, soldier," he said under his breath. "Lead the way." Rex barked once, sharp and decisive, then took off into the snow. They crossed the clearing, boots crunching through the frozen crust. The forest swallowed them within minutes. The pines here were ancient, trunks wide enough to hide a man. Ethan moved with quiet precision, scanning the ground for signs. There were faint impressions, animal tracks, maybe deer, but layered among them were straighter, deeper prints, too deliberate to be from wildlife. For nearly 2 hours they trudged through the wilderness, following Rex's unerring pace. The dog stopped occasionally, nose to the ground, then bounded ahead again. The deeper they went, the quieter the forest became. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ethan's eyes caught something unusual. Marks on the trees. 3 short, parallel slashes carved with something sharp. The same spacing every time. He crouched to examine one closely. The cuts were recent. The bark still wept sap. "Military field code," he muttered. 3 slashes. Danger ahead, or territory marked. But whose? No units had trained here in years. Rex pressed forward, ignoring his command to stop. Ethan followed, muscles tight with unease. Soon, through the trees, a faint column of smoke rose into the pale sky. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant life, or trouble. The source appeared minutes later, a cabin, smaller and older than his own, leaning slightly under the weight of snow. The roof sagged, and a rusted metal chimney coughed out a thread of gray smoke. Yet something felt wrong. The door was chained and padlocked from the outside. Ethan signaled Rex to stay. He circled the perimeter, boots sinking silently into the snow. There were no fresh footprints, just old depressions filled with frost. The windows were shuttered, but through a gap he glimpsed movement, a faint twitch, a hand perhaps. Someone was inside. He approached the door, tested the chain. It was tight but corroded. "Rex," he whispered. The dog padded closer, hackles raised, a low growl vibrating from his chest. Ethan took his combat knife, wedged it between the chain and the hinge, and began to work. Metal groaned under pressure until, with a final snap, it gave way. The door creaked open, releasing a gust of cold air tinged with rot and smoke. Ethan entered, rifle raised. The cabin interior was dim, lit only by a dying fire in a small iron stove. And on the far side of the room, an old man lay on a narrow bed, handcuffed to the frame. His skin was pale, his lips blue, breath shallow. A filthy wool blanket covered him up to the chest, and his eyes fluttered open at the sound of footsteps. Who's there?" The voice was raspy, fragile. "Name's Ethan Ward," he said, lowering the weapon, but not his guard. "You're safe now. Who did this to you?" The man's head rolled weakly to one side. "Victor, my nephew. He said he'd come back when I was ready to talk." Ethan moved closer. The man's wrists were red and swollen from the cuffs. He reached into his pack, found a small lockpick kit, and went to work. It took seconds. The cuffs snapped open, and the old man's arms fell limply to his sides. He was in his 70s, maybe older, thin as bark. His face was deeply lined, with a full beard streaked gray and white. Despite the weakness, there was a certain dignity about him, the posture of a man who'd once commanded respect but had been broken by time and betrayal. His eyes, an icy blue, followed Ethan's every move with flickering suspicion. Ethan quickly checked his pulse, then rummaged through his pack again. He tore open a field electrolyte packet, mixed it with snowmelt in his canteen, and carefully poured it between the man's cracked lips. He also pressed a chemical heating pack to his chest, then dragged the bed closer to the stove. "You're not dying here tonight," Ethan said quietly. After a few long minutes, color began to return to the man's face. His breathing deepened, less ragged. "Victor, you said? "Why would he chain you up?" Ethan asked. The man coughed, voice trembling. "He wants the papers, the mining deeds. Says they're worth millions. I told him I wouldn't hand them over, so he left me here to freeze." Ethan's jaw tightened. He glanced at the table beside the bed. There, an open, leather-bound journal, the last page scrawled with shaking handwriting. "Victor said he'd get the documents this time. If I'm gone before that, may whoever finds this forgive me for the greed that destroyed my blood." Ethan closed the book slowly. "You're safe now, Samuel," he said, reading the name signed at the end. "I'll make sure of it." The sky outside had turned the color of steel, and the air inside the cabin was sharp enough to see each breath. Ethan Ward moved with quiet precision, his mind reverting to the discipline that had once kept him alive overseas. He fetched a lamp, lit it with a trembling match, and watched its weak glow crawl across the walls. The old man, Samuel Edwards, lay motionless on the bed, his skin pale as paper, lips tinged blue. Ethan wrapped him in a wool blanket, slid a heating pack beneath his chest, and adjusted the flame of the stove. The faint hiss of burning wood was the only sound. Samuel was smaller now that he was free from the handcuffs, a thin, stooped man with a gaunt face and a full gray beard. Deep lines carved his skin, not just from age, but from long years of strain and bitterness. His hands trembled when he tried to move, knuckles swollen from cold and time. Yet beneath the fragility, Ethan saw something else, a quiet dignity, the kind only men who had once built something real carried with them. When the old man's breathing steadied, Ethan found a canteen of melted snow and lifted it to his lips. "Drink slow," he said. Samuel obeyed, eyes flickering open with faint recognition. Where's Rex?" he rasped. The Malinois, who had been sitting sentinel by the door, perked his ears. He rose, padded forward, and rested his muzzle gently on Samuel's arm. A faint smile cracked through the old man's face. "Good boy. You made it." Ethan watched the exchange quietly. "He's yours, then." Samuel nodded weakly. "He was my partner, my protector. I thought they killed him." "Who's they?" Ethan asked. The old man turned his head toward the fire. "My nephew, Victor, and the men he hired." His voice trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. "He wanted what I wouldn't give him, the documents that prove my claim to the Edwards mining tract. There's gold there, hidden beneath the North Ridge, been in my family for 80 years. He found out, and greed swallowed him whole." Ethan poured another cup of water. "Why not just give it to him?" Samuel's eyes flared for a moment, like embers revived. "Because it doesn't belong to him. He didn't earn it. My brother's son never worked a day in those hills. He thinks blood gives him the right to everything it touches." The bitterness in Samuel's tone reminded Ethan of the way soldiers spoke about corrupt commanders, people who traded loyalty for gain. He didn't press further. Instead, he examined the cabin. Against one wall stood a chest of mining maps, rusted tools, and a few weathered photographs. One picture, yellowed with age, showed a younger Samuel standing beside a woman, smiling, hair tied with a ribbon, eyes soft but steady. Ethan pointed to it. "Your wife?" Samuel hesitated. "No," he said quietly. "That was Caroline." Ethan felt something flicker at the name, though he didn't yet know why. "She looks kind." "She was more than that," Samuel said, voice breaking faintly. "She was my heart, but I lost her decades ago, before I could come home." The fire popped. Ethan turned away, feeling the ghost of his own losses stirring. Faces he couldn't save, names that still haunted him when the world went quiet. War had a way of erasing time. Pain aged everyone the same. He checked his radio, twisting the dial. Static swallowed the room. "This is Delta 19er, broadcasting emergency medical. Any response?" Nothing but wind. The storm outside was building again, howling across the ridge. "Damn it," he muttered, setting it aside. Rex shifted, restless, ears twitching toward the door. The dog's muscles tensed beneath his coat. Ethan noticed. "What is it?" Rex stared at the window, teeth bared slightly. Samuel struggled to lift his head. "He hears engines. Always does before I can." Ethan crossed to the frosted window and peered out. Snow whirled under the moonlight, but faintly, far off among the pines, a glow moved. A steady, artificial light cutting through the forest. Headlamps, snowmobiles. He cursed under his breath, turned back to the old man. "How many men does your nephew have?" "2, maybe 3, but he's worse than all of them combined." Samuel coughed hard. "You should go, son. You don't owe me this." Ethan gave a grim half-smile. "Maybe not, but I've left enough people behind already." He pulled the M4 carbine from his shoulder, checked the chamber, then turned to Rex. "You stay close to him. No noise, unless I say so." Rex obeyed instantly, curling near Samuel's bedside like a trained sentinel. Ethan extinguished the lantern, leaving only the red flicker of the stove. Shadows swallowed the walls. He crouched near the window, watching the light grow closer. 2 beams now. Snowmobiles moving slow, cautious. Whoever they were, they knew exactly where they were going. Time crawled. Samuel's breathing turned ragged again. Ethan knelt beside him. "If anything happens, where's the document he's after?" Samuel's eyes fluttered open. "Hidden, beneath the floorboard, by the stove. But it's not just paper. There's something else. A key. Don't let him have it." Ethan nodded. "Understood." The growl of the engines deepened. He slipped outside, snow biting his face. The forest glowed silver beneath the moon, branches heavy with ice. He moved through the trees with the stealth of a man who had once hunted enemies in the dark. From behind a fallen log, he saw them. 2 men on snowmobiles, faces hidden behind goggles and masks. Both carried rifles slung across their backs. They parked beside the cabin, engines rumbling low. The first dismounted, a tall man, broad-shouldered, moving with arrogance. The other was shorter, jittery, scanning the tree line. The tall one pulled off his goggles, revealing a square-jawed face, rough with stubble, eyes dark as pitch. His expression was the kind of cold that came from years of getting his way. Victor Edwards. Ethan didn't need to ask. Greed had a face, and it looked like that. Victor gestured to the other man. "Watch the tree line. The old man's probably dead by now, but I want those papers." His voice carried a smooth confidence, the kind of man used to giving orders and breaking promises. Ethan melted deeper into shadow. His finger rested on the trigger, but he didn't fire, not yet. 2 targets, both armed. Shooting would only alert others if there were more. Inside, Rex began to bark, a deep guttural warning. Victor cursed, signaling to his man. "He's alive. Move." Ethan had seconds to decide. He slipped back to the cabin's rear, eased the door open silently, and whispered, "Rex, quiet." The dog froze instantly, growl fading to a low rumble. Samuel stirred weakly. "He's here, isn't he?" "Yeah," Ethan replied, "but he's not taking you." The snowmobile's engines cut out. Silence fell again, thick and suffocating. Then came the crunch of boots on snow, steady, deliberate. Ethan gripped the rifle tighter, pulse steady as a drumbeat. Through the gap in the shutter, he saw Victor's shadow moving closer to the door. The man's hand reached for the latch. Ethan exhaled slowly, the cold air leaving his lips in a faint mist. The storm howled once more outside, masking the sound of his heartbeat. The first knock shattered the silence. 3 slow, heavy thuds. "Uncle?" Victor called from the darkness. "You still alive in there?" Ethan said nothing. The second man's voice trembled slightly. "Maybe we should wait." "Shut up!" Victor snapped. Inside, Rex's muscles coiled. Ethan raised the rifle and whispered to himself, "Not tonight." The first knock still echoed through the small cabin when the door slammed open with a violent shove. A gust of icy air rushed in, scattering ashes from the dying stove. Victor Edwards stepped inside first, tall, broad-shouldered, a pistol gleaming in his gloved hand. Behind him stumbled Greg Tiller, his flashlight shaking, breath short, eyes darting nervously between the shadows. Victor's voice carried the false sweetness of a man who thought he still owned the world. "Uncle," he said smoothly, "you look awful. I told you this wouldn't have to happen if you'd just handed me those papers." From the bed, Samuel Edwards coughed weakly, his voice breaking. "You left me here to die." Victor sighed as if bored. "You make it sound cruel. I gave you time to think." His gaze flicked to Ethan Ward, standing half in shadow near the fire, rifle low but ready. "And who the hell are you?" Ethan's voice was calm, even. "Someone who doesn't like watching old men freeze in chains." Victor's grin faded to a sneer. "You think this is about mercy? That land's worth a fortune. I'm just taking what should have been mine." "You think blood gives you the right to anything?" Ethan said. "Blood gives me everything," Victor snapped. Rex growled from the corner, low, deep, a warning that made the air itself tighten. Victor turned the gun toward the dog. "That mangy mutt again. Should have finished him the first time." The words were still leaving his mouth when Ethan moved. His body reacted before thought, years of muscle memory. He struck the gun aside just as Victor fired. The shot went wide, grazing Ethan's shoulder. Pain seared through him, but he stayed on his feet. He rammed the rifle stock into Victor's wrist. The weapon clattered to the floor. Rex lunged, colliding with Victor's chest, teeth sinking into the man's forearm. Victor shouted, kicking wildly, trying to shake him off. "Shoot him, Greg!" Victor screamed. Greg froze near the doorway, his face pale beneath the flickering lamplight. "Vic, maybe we should—" "Shoot him!" But Greg's trembling hands wouldn't obey. He looked between Ethan and the chaos, then dropped his rifle. "I didn't sign up for this." And with that, he bolted into the storm, flashlight swinging wildly as he disappeared into the trees. Ethan grappled with Victor, the two men slamming against the table. The oil lamp toppled, glass shattered, fire spilled across the floor, licking upward with a hungry hiss. Within seconds, the flames crawled across the dry wood walls. "Rex!" Ethan shouted. The dog released Victor's arm and leapt back. Victor staggered to his feet, face twisted with rage. "You think this ends here?" he roared. "Those papers are mine." He kicked open the chest by the stove, scattering its contents. Old maps, folders, and a small metal box. The firelight flickered across his face as he clawed for the documents. "Leave it," Ethan ordered. Victor ignored him, grabbing the box. Ethan fired a warning shot into the floor. Wood splintered inches from Victor's hand. Still he didn't stop. "Don't let him," Samuel rasped from the bed, coughing violently. The flames roared higher, consuming the curtains. Smoke thickened. Ethan snatched a wool blanket, soaked it with water from the snow pot, and threw it over Samuel. "We're leaving." He lifted the old man into his arms. The weight was nothing, but the heat, the smoke, the pain in his shoulder made every step an eternity. Behind him, Victor screamed as the flames surrounded him. Still, he clawed for the papers, obsessed, half mad. Ethan turned once, saw the man's silhouette swallowed by fire, then looked away. Outside, the snow and wind hit like salvation. Ethan stumbled into the drift, lowering Samuel carefully onto the ground. Rex bounded beside them, coughing, fur singed. Far off, through the storm, the faint glow of Greg's flashlight vanished down the mountain trail, the one that led toward Pinecrest. "Go," Ethan whispered hoarsely. "At least someone will tell them what happened up here." He looked back at the burning cabin. The roof collapsed inward with a thunderous groan, sparks leaping into the sky like dying stars. "Let it burn," Ethan said quietly. "Some things don't deserve saving." Rex pressed against his leg, whining softly. Together they stood in the snow, watching the fire die into the endless dark. By dawn, only embers remained where the cabin had stood. The forest was silent again, draped in white. Ethan Ward had built a makeshift shelter inside an old tool shed behind the ruins, its roof sagging under frost. Inside, Samuel Edwards lay on a pile of hay, wrapped in every blanket Ethan could find. Rex guarded the door, his fur still singed at the tips, breath rising in faint clouds. Ethan's shoulder burned with every movement. He pressed a strip of gauze against the wound and tightened it. Then he checked Samuel's pulse, faint but steady. The old man's eyelids fluttered open. "Still here?" he whispered. "Still here," Ethan said. He knelt beside him, feeding the stove with broken planks. Minutes passed in fragile quiet before Samuel spoke again. "Ethan, the papers." Ethan looked at him sharply. "They're not in the chest. I hid them. In my boot. The left one." His voice was barely a breath. Ethan removed the old man's boot carefully and found a small leather envelope tucked beneath the lining. Inside were faded mining deeds, their ink cracked with age, and at the bottom a signature that froze Ethan where he knelt. Caroline Winter, his grandmother. Samuel saw the recognition in Ethan's face. "Half the mine belongs to her line. She was my partner. My heart. We were young. But when they said I died in Vietnam, she waited anyway. God help me, she waited her whole life." Ethan felt the weight of it settle in his chest, the impossible web of coincidence that wasn't coincidence at all. He stared at the paper, at the delicate handwriting he'd seen only in old letters. Samuel's voice softened. "Now her grandson carries her name back to me. Maybe the Lord still keeps score." Ethan exhaled slowly. "You were supposed to be dead." "I was," Samuel said, a flicker of wry humor in his tone. "Seems we both came back ghosts." Outside, the wind began to change, the kind that precedes a clearing sky. Ethan reached for his pack, pulling out a military emergency beacon, old but still functional. He flipped the cover open, the green light blinking to life. "Beacons transmitting," he said quietly. "If any patrol's still watching this region, they'll pick it up within a few hours." He adjusted Samuel's blankets and settled near the stove. Rex crept closer, curling by Samuel's feet. "Why'd you come here, son?" the old man murmured. "Because I thought I could hide," Ethan said. "Turns out some things don't let you." Hours later, 5, maybe 6, the rhythmic thump of rotor blades tore through the silence. A search and rescue helicopter emerged from the clouds, its red body gleaming in the early sun. Snow whipped up as it descended. Ethan signaled with a flare. The door slid open, and 2 medics in bright orange parkas leapt down. The lead, Lieutenant Sarah McConnell, tall, athletic, with cropped blonde hair and eyes sharp as ice, moved fast. "Who's injured?" Ethan pointed to Samuel. "Severe hypothermia, smoke inhalation. He needs oxygen." Sarah knelt beside the old man, her gloved hands steady, professional. "We've got you, sir. Hang on." As they worked, another medic shouted over the wind. "We've got a live one near the creek, badly burned." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Victor." Minutes later, they carried the man up. Half conscious, skin blistered, hair scorched, face barely recognizable. but the eyes, even through pain, still burned with greed. Ethan pulled a set of military cuffs from his pack and snapped them around Victor's wrists. "He's not going anywhere." Sarah looked at Ethan, then at the dog sitting beside him. "You both look like hell." He almost smiled. "Feels about right." They lifted off moments later. From the helicopter window, Ethan watched the blackened ruin fade below, surrounded by the endless white of the Montana wilderness. Beside him, Samuel slept under heavy blankets. Rex pressed his head against Ethan's knee, eyes half closed, but alert. For the first time in months, Ethan felt something he hadn't dared name, the faint pull of belonging. Spring came slowly to the mountains. The ice cracked along the streams, and the first shoots of green pushed through the thaw. At Pinecrest Hospital, the sun spilled through wide windows, warming the pale blue walls of room 214. Samuel Edwards sat propped against the pillows, oxygen tube gone, color returning to his cheeks. Across from him sat Ethan Ward, his shoulder bandaged, beard trimmed short. His brown work jacket still bore a burn mark on one sleeve. On the floor, Rex lay stretched out, tail thumping lazily every time someone entered the room. Samuel's voice was steadier now. "You know, your grandmother never forgot me," he said quietly. "Caroline kept half the deed as a memory. I thought I'd taken everything from her. Turns out, she was the one who saved it all." Ethan looked out the window, the snow-tipped ridge glowing gold. "She used to sit by the window every winter," he said. "Said the snow reminded her that love survives the cold." Samuel smiled faintly. She was right. He reached into the bedside drawer and handed Ethan a folded envelope, the original mining deed. "It's yours now. Her name, my name. Maybe they can finally rest." Ethan didn't argue. He simply nodded, eyes distant. A week later, Ethan returned to the mountain to clear what remained of the cabin. The snow had melted into mud, and the forest was waking. Rex trotted beside him, nose twitching at every new scent. Behind the ruins, the old storage shed still stood. Rex stopped suddenly, barking once. He pawed at the door. Ethan pried it open and stepped inside. Dust hung in the air, glowing in thin bands of light. Against the far wall sat a small wooden chest, carved with the initials C.W. and S.E. Ethan opened it. Inside were letters bound with ribbon, faded photographs, and a small velvet ring box. The ring inside gleamed softly, untouched by time. He unfolded one of the letters, Caroline's handwriting. "If you ever return, Samuel, I'll keep the lamp burning until it burns out with me." Ethan stood there a long time, the words sinking deep. He closed the box carefully and whispered, "She did wait." When he brought the keepsakes to Samuel at the hospital, the old man cried silently for the first time. "I thought the world had buried that part of me," he said. "It didn't," Ethan answered. "It just waited for you to come home." Weeks later, Samuel was strong enough to leave the hospital. Ethan drove him back to the hills, to a new cabin they'd built together beside the river. Spring birds sang in the pines, and the snowmelt ran clear and cold. They worked during the days, rebuilding fences and mending the land. At night, they sat on the porch with coffee, steaming in tin mugs, Rex lying between them. One evening, Samuel said, "I've been thinking, we should start something, for men like you, for dogs like him, a place where both can heal." Ethan looked at him, surprised. "A shelter?" "Oh, bridge," Samuel said. "We'll call it the Ghost and Gold Foundation, for those haunted by the past and those who saved them." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I like that." The sky turned amber as the sun sank behind the mountains. Ethan leaned back, listening to the wind in the pines. "You know," he said softly, "I slept through the night last week. First time I didn't check the door 3 times. Samuel chuckled. "That's how you know you're home." Rex lifted his head at the sound, tail brushing against the porch. Ethan reached down, scratching behind his ears. "You brought us here, didn't you, boy?" Samuel smiled, eyes glinting in the firelight. Maybe he didn't just come looking for help. Maybe he came looking for someone who could save us all. The evening settled into peace. The river whispered below. The mountains held their silence. Rex stretched out, eyes half closed, content. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt the ghost's quiet inside him. He looked toward the horizon, the last light of day fading into gold. Sometimes destiny doesn't shout. Sometimes it scratches softly at your door in the middle of a snowstorm, wearing the face of a wounded dog. Sometimes miracles don't come as blinding lights from the heavens. They come quietly, through a door half frozen by snow, carried on the back of a wounded dog. Maybe that's how God speaks when we've stopped listening. Not with thunder, but with loyalty, warmth, and second chances. Ethan thought he was saving a life that night, but perhaps it was his own soul that God was trying to rescue, through the devotion of a creature that never stopped believing in him. And maybe that's the message for all of us. No matter how far we've wandered, grace can still find us, even in the coldest winter. If this story touched your heart today, take a moment to share it with someone who might need hope. Write in the comments where you're watching from. Let us know how God has shown you kindness in unexpected ways. And if you believe that every act of compassion is a small miracle, click subscribe, join our family, and help us keep these stories of faith and love alive. May God bless you, your family, and every loyal soul who's ever waited at your door. Because sometimes the miracle isn't out there. It's already beside you, wagging its tail.